You are at a family gathering. Everyone is taking turns holding the baby. The baby has been doing well, smiling, tolerating the handoffs, even looking somewhat pleased with all the attention. And then it's your turn. You reach out with a big smile, you make the voice, you make the face. And that baby looks at you, directly at you, and their face crumples from the inside out, their lip begins to quiver, and they erupt in the most unambiguous rejection you have ever received in your life. The room gets that awkward silence. Someone makes a joke. You hand the baby back, trying not to take it personally, but privately you wonder, what did they see? What is happening in that baby's mind that produces such a complete and immediate verdict? And possibly the question that lingers longest, does this baby know something about me that I don't know about myself? Today, we are going into the neuroscience and developmental psychology of infant social perception. What babies actually detect, how their brand new nervous systems evaluate the world, and why the specific behavior of crying at certain people is not an accident, not a personality quirk, and not, despite all appearances, a judgment of your character. The science from Harvard's Center on the Developing Child and Johns Hopkins' Attachment Research Laboratories tells a story that is both more sophisticated and more moving than most people imagine. The first thing to understand is that the baby brain, despite its apparent simplicity, is operating one of the most impressive information processing operations in nature. At birth, the human brain contains approximately 100 billion neurons, the same number as the adult brain. What the newborn brain lacks is not neurons, it lacks connections. In the first 3 years of life, the brain produces synaptic connections at an astonishing rate, approximately 700 to 1,000 new neural connections per second. This synaptic proliferation, documented extensively by researchers at Harvard's Center on the Developing Child, represents the brain building itself in real time, constructing the neural architecture that will process emotion, govern behavior, regulate stress, and define the child's capacity for relationship for the rest of their life. And here is what makes this especially important for understanding why babies cry at certain people. This construction process is not happening in a vacuum. It is experience dependent. Every interaction the baby has, every face they see, every voice they hear, every emotional exchange they participate in is literally shaping the neural architecture being built. The environment does not just inform the baby's experience, for it structures their brain. Two Nobel Prize-winning Harvard neuroscientists, David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel, established the concept of critical periods in brain development. Windows of time during which specific neural systems are especially sensitive to environmental input and during which the absence or distortion of appropriate input produces lasting structural effects. The social brain. The neural systems responsible for reading faces, interpreting emotional signals, regulating attachment behavior, has its own critical periods in early infancy that coincide precisely with the developmental window during which stranger anxiety emerges. What this means is that when a baby cries at you, they are not being randomly emotional. They are running a newly constructed social evaluation system that is simultaneously highly sensitive and highly incomplete. And they are doing the only thing they can do with a stimulus that doesn't compute within their current model: alarm. The specific developmental milestone that underlies stranger anxiety is called object permanence, a concept first described by developmental psychologist Jean Piaget. And its relationship to attachment is critical. Object permanence is the cognitive understanding that objects and people continue to exist even when they cannot be currently perceived. Infants below approximately 6 months of age do not possess this understanding. When their primary caregiver moves out of sight, the caregiver, in the infant's cognitive world, has ceased to exist. There is no felt absence because there is no representation of the person as a continuing entity. Around 6 to 8 months of age, the prefrontal and parietal cortices develop sufficiently to support object permanence. The baby now understands, in a prelinguistic felt sense, that their caregiver continues to exist when out of sight. This means they can now form a genuine attachment representation, an internal model of their primary caregiver as a specific, irreplaceable, continuing presence. The immediate consequence of this developmental milestone, described in detail by attachment theorists John Bowlby and empirically documented by Mary Ainsworth in her landmark research at Johns Hopkins University, is that the baby now has a referent against which to compare all other social stimuli. Before object permanence, all faces are more or less equivalent sources of social interaction. After object permanence, there is one face, or a very small number, that is recognized as the secure base, and every other face represents a departure from that reference point. Stranger anxiety is not irrational fear of unfamiliar people. It is the natural and neurologically healthy consequence of having formed a genuine attachment bond. The infant who shows no stranger anxiety at 8 months is often, paradoxically, a cause for developmental concern, because it suggests that the attachment bond is insufficiently formed to create the necessary referent against which to evaluate strangers. The baby who cries at you is, in a genuine sense, demonstrating healthy psychological development. Their attachment system is working. And now we need to address the specific sensory mechanisms by which a baby evaluates a new face, and why some faces trigger distress more reliably than others. The infant visual system develops rapidly in the first 6 months of life, progressing from the ability to detect high contrast patterns to the ability to process complex facial information with increasing sophistication. Research by Charles Nelson, a developmental neuroscientist at Harvard Medical School, has documented that by 3 months, infants demonstrate a clear preference for faces over non-face stimuli, and by 6 months, they are performing facial emotion recognition, distinguishing happy from fearful expressions, with significant accuracy. But here is what is less commonly known: infant facial processing is not neutral or objective. It is calibrated to the faces the baby has seen most frequently. The neural representations of familiar faces, primarily the primary caregiver's face, are processed with greater fluency and less cognitive effort than unfamiliar faces. The familiar face generates what neuroscientists call fluency: easy, automatic, effortful, free processing. The unfamiliar face requires the system to work harder, generates more uncertainty, and activates vigilance responses in the amygdala, the brain's threat detection system. This effect is amplified by several specific facial and behavioral features that research has identified as reliably triggering distress responses in infants. Facial asymmetry that deviates significantly from the average template. Unusual features, facial hair, glasses, masks, increases processing difficulty and consequently activates more vigilance. Emotional incongruence, a wide smile that doesn't reach the eyes, or tense body language that contradicts a friendly facial expression, is detected by the infant's emotion reading system as a discrepancy that signals unreliability. Direct, sustained eye contact from an unfamiliar person triggers the threat circuits because in primate communication, prolonged direct eye contact from a stranger is a dominance display. What all of this means is that the baby crying at you is not responding to who you are. They are responding to the information their developing neural system is producing about you. And that information is shaped by the limitations and calibrations of a brain that is still being built. We need to address something that most explanations of stranger anxiety skip over: the role of the baby's emotional state at the moment of encounter. Because the same baby will respond completely differently to the same person depending on what is happening in their nervous system at the time. Developmental psychologist Jerome Kagan at Harvard University spent decades studying what he called behavioral inhibition, the tendency of certain temperamentally sensitive infants to respond to novel stimuli with wariness, withdrawal, and physiological stress markers, including elevated cortisol and heart rate acceleration. Kagan's longitudinal research, following children from infancy through adolescence, I found that the threshold for stranger anxiety varies considerably between individuals and is significantly predicted by temperamental factors that are present from birth. Infants who score high on behavioral inhibition, approximately 15 to 20% of the population, show dramatically stronger and more persistent stranger anxiety than infants with lower inhibition scores. These babies are not more anxious in a pathological sense, they are more sensitive. Their nervous systems process novelty with more intensity, generate more arousal in response to unfamiliar stimuli, and require more time and safety to move from vigilance to comfort. Importantly, all infants are significantly more likely to cry at strangers when they are tired, hungry, in an unfamiliar environment, or have recently been separated from their primary caregiver. The same baby who tolerates a new face calmly after a nap in a familiar home environment may respond with immediate distress when approached by the same face when fatigued at an unfamiliar location. The crying is not about you. It is about the accumulated load on a small nervous system that hasn't yet developed the regulatory capacity to buffer multiple stressors simultaneously. Pediatric psychologist Dr. Harvey Karp, whose work on infant behavior has been widely cited in clinical practice, describes this phenomenon as the newborn nervous system's binary response system. Below threshold, the baby is available for social engagement. Above threshold, the baby enters distress mode regardless of the trigger. Cross the threshold at the moment you approach, and you will get tears regardless of your intentions. There is one more dimension of baby stranger anxiety that is both scientifically fascinating and profoundly human: what it predicts about the child's future social and emotional development. Longitudinal research from the Minnesota Longitudinal Study, which has followed 267 individuals from birth through their adult years, conducted at the University of Minnesota, has tracked stranger anxiety responses in infancy and correlated them with social and emotional outcomes in childhood, adolescence, and adulthood. The findings are nuanced and worth understanding carefully. Moderate stranger anxiety in the expected developmental window, combined with secure attachment, is associated with positive social and emotional outcomes. These children grow into adults who are capable of appropriate wariness of new social situations, not paralyzed by them, but not recklessly trusting either. They have a well-calibrated social alarm system. Children whose stranger anxiety was very prolonged, very intense, and resisted reduction through exposure tend to show higher rates of behavioral inhibition and social anxiety in childhood. These are the children who became the adults who take longer to warm up to new people, who feel more drained by social novelty, who need more time and safety before trust develops. For these individuals, the early sensitivity was a temperamental signal that their nervous system processes social information with greater intensity, a trait that, with the right development, becomes empathy, perceptiveness, and deep loyalty. Rather than anxiety, the baby crying at you is not sending you a personal message. They are running their survival programming, checking the new stimulus against their attachment reference and finding it, reasonably, to be an unknown quantity that requires caution until proven safe. Given time, given slow and gentle approach, given the space to set the pace of their own comfort, those same sensitive babies are often the ones who form the deepest and most trusting bonds. They just need you to earn it at their pace, not yours. The baby who cries when they see you is not broken, not overly sensitive, and not making a character assessment. They are a sophisticated information processing system operating at the outer edge of its current capability, only applying an evolutionary survival mechanism that has kept human infants safe for hundreds of thousands of years and doing exactly what a healthy, well-attached, neurologically appropriate baby should do, reserving their deepest trust for the very small number of people who have earned it through sustained, consistent, warm presence. Research from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, the University of Minnesota, and developmental laboratories around the world agrees on this point. Stranger anxiety is not a problem to be fixed. It is a feature to be understood and honored. The baby who cries at you is well attached, neurologically healthy, and appropriately cautious. These are good things. If you want to befriend a wary baby, here's what the research actually supports. Get at their level. Make no sudden movements. Let them look at you without approaching. Let them set the pace. And when they eventually crawl toward you on their own term, and if you're patient, they will, the trust you've earned by respecting their process will be genuine and complete. Has a baby ever cried specifically at you? Tell us your story in the comments.